Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good dark topic for you today. Let's do it. When did you discover that someone in your family was evil? Some of these are not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When my 11-year-old cousin got cancer, her mom and boyfriend were shooting up her pain medicine. My cousin was in so much pain, she told her doctors. That's when the doctors stopped giving her mom a prescription, and the nurses dispensed her pain meds at the hospital. Unfortunately, they could not keep track of medication while at home, so they reported it. CPS removed her. She died shortly after in foster care. Parents were never charged. My cousin had a baby and then disappeared for a few years. When the baby was 3, she came back into our lives with the worst news I've ever heard. Her daughter had a disease that was going to make her deteriorate quickly. She would lose her sight, hearing, and mobility before eventually dying. She had a huge fundraiser event in her new community she moved to. She falsified doctors' letters and records so she could take advantage of charities like the Make-A-Wish Foundation. The Make-A-Wish Foundation sent her family to Disney World. The truth came out when people in her community realized the money she raised from the fundraiser didn't actually go to the cause. She had pictures on social media of them going to the bank and everything. After it came out, she was the scum of the earth. She vanished, and no one has heard from her since. May you rot in hell, Cynthia. I had an aunt, my mother's sister, Betty. She was mean as a snake, not in a physical way, but in a domineering my way or the highway kind of manner. For some reason, she never liked me. I'm sure it was something stupid I said when I was 6 or 7, but it really was so obvious that even my immediate family would wonder what I had ever done to her. Then again, she loved to take swipes at everyone and everybody if they weren't living life or saying things in precise accordance with the way Betty thought it should be. Essentially, the self-appointed dowager of the family, determined to dictate to everyone how they should live their lives. Betty was married to her poor husband, and no occasion with those two ever was complete without her giving him a tongue lashing for something trivial. When Bill died, there was no funeral, no nothing. Just took his ashes and dumped them in the sea. Anyway, Betty used to go on vacations by herself all over the world. We just took it for granted that her husband didn't want to go, until, that is, her husband died. As it turned out, Betty had something like a 30-year affair with someone, a guy who was always her traveling companion. When my uncle died, this guy was over the moon because now Betty was newly single, only he didn't realize that Betty had a different guy waiting in the wings. I won't go into all the things she did and said, but she had 2 kids. Her son was molested by a next-door neighbor when he was a kid. Betty knew about it and did nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But she sure liked to talk shit about her son. He's messed up to this day. And she continued with her son's children. Just would talk about what idiots they were. One grandson got so tired of it, he literally married an Australian girl, moved there, and has never been back. Meanwhile, at my other cousin's 65th birthday party, Betty thought it would be a nice to tell an adorable anecdote about how my cousin was a nice little rule follower. She proceeds to tell the story about how she absolutely forbade my cousin, when walking home from school, from crossing the street if there was no crossing guard. One day, the crossing guard did not show up for work, so my cousin stood petrified at the curb for 2 solid hours until my aunt realized her daughter had not come home from school. While Betty thought she was telling a story about her daughter, in truth, she was telling a story about herself. So yeah, no bank robberies, no torturing kittens or anything like that. Instead, a steady, relentless savaging of anyone near and dear to her in her life. Not a reflective bone in her body either. Or else, at some point, she might have thought of those damages that she was doing. Betty just seems like one of those bitter people that just is do as I say, not as I do. That is just so hard to like. Ugh. When my dad died of COVID, my aunt tried to say she was entitled to some stuff of his since it belonged in the family. She even called the lawyer on us, and it was a big deal, and my mom didn't need to deal with that trying to raise 3 kids on her own, so F her. She still bothers us about stuff, and all it is like plates and some pictures and some other things. My brother's addiction has led him to spinning some ridiculous stories. I'm not sure if he is very convincing or if my father chooses to believe him because of some sunken cost fallacy, or he genuinely refuses to give up. But my brother has told lies and stories about me and my siblings to the point that he's the only child who talks to my father anymore. He convinced my father that I forced him to do drugs, but I knew my brother was evil when scared away my sister with physical violence. Last month he went missing for a week, only to turn up after flipping his car high on pills. My father doesn't know it yet, but my mother is planning on leaving him because my father chooses my brother over her. No one can convince my father that he's enabling. No one can convince my brother to stop. Hard drugs really destroy entire families. When I went to visit family in Michigan in 2001, I learned that the reason 2 of my uncles weren't on speaking terms was because one of them sexually molested the other's daughter once. After that, I learned from other people in the family that he also masturbated in front of my sister in a car parked in an alley, molested 2 other cousins, and even molested his own granddaughter. I don't know about evil, but my dad got remarried and has a kid and stepson with his new spouse. All of that would be fine if he didn't pretend that none of us, offspring from first marriage, exist. So he can pretend this family is the first family and we never happened. Once this realization hit me, I stopped contacting him. And once I stopped putting in the effort, everything else dissipated. We haven't spoken at all. He does not care in the least. I honestly believe that he wishes we never even existed. He is a failure as a father and as a man. When he purposely excluded his 4-year-old son from a previous relationship from his wedding to his new spouse, deleted all photos of his son from his social media, and legally signed away all parental rights. He has since had 2 more kids with said new spouse. Ugh. When my husband's brother, one of 5 siblings, said he couldn't make it to our house to plan their mother's funeral because he had to work. Meanwhile, we found out he wasn't working because we caught him on Ring doorbell entering the mom's house to rifle through it while the rest of us were planning the funeral at my house. When I was around 10, I was on vacation to see family that just had new babies. I was supposed to stay with the other kids while most of the adults went into the other room to talk. They left 1 or 2 others with us to keep an eye on us. I heard arguing, and after a little while of listening in, I found out that my grandfather was, he's dead, a porn-addicted pedophile attracted to my older sister, about 17 at the time. He made disgusting drawings of her and posted them on the internet for others. The argument was about whether or not they should let him be around the kids. He only abused some of the children. Those he abused said no, and those he didn't abuse were playing devil's advocate. My cousin remarried. She had 2 sons from her previous marriage. Her new husband has 3 sons from his previous marriage. He's a very strict disciplinarian. Her eldest son, 14, was struggling at school, and the new stepdad was violent and abusive. She sided with the new husband, and instead of helping her son, she kicked him out and hasn't spoken to him in over a year. He lives with his grandma now. His mom hasn't even asked about him. What a see you next Tuesday. When my ex said, "You've been a godsend, I want a divorce," I had taken time off from work to take care of her parents. She told me this right before her dad died, and she inherited. She found a boyfriend while I was with her parents. She got the house by declaring I had abandoned it. I was with her parents. When I was 8, my grandmother beat the shit out of me for not wanting to be part of an abortion is the devil's choice. Float in a 4th of July parade years later, she told me she should have just killed me that day. 3 days ago, at the age of 89, she fell down a flight of stairs and suffered 3 broken ribs, massive brain bleed, and several broken bones. And that bitch will live forever, because the devil doesn't want competition. You're entitled to your anger and pain and opinion, of course, but try not to hold on to that posthumous anger. But again, who am I to know? But let that shit go. Late to the party, pretty much found out my older brother was sexually abusing one of my cousins and other kids. Didn't come to light till decades later, so now he has pretty much disappeared from social media. He did have girlfriends, but nothing lasted. One time, his ex-girlfriend, who had a teen daughter, we just said I will never effing forgive him. We didn't need to know what happened. He was once almost killed because a bunch of an ex-girlfriend's relatives cornered him. Those that attacked him got charged for attempted murder. Brother never pursued civil damages. He later disappeared from our lives completely because we now know. Cousin, who was abused, is a mess mentally and has become a sex worker and drug addict. I was dying of bacterial meningitis, not known just yet, and going into a coma at the hospital when my mother shows up and tries to keep them from putting me on life support. When my wife tried to say that it wasn't what I wanted, my mother hit her in the face and said, "I don't give up. What about his wishes?" To which she was arrested. After I somehow survived, I asked my mother for a simple apology for hitting my wife. I didn't want my 3 children thinking it's okay to hit their mother. She said, and I quote, "Well, I'm sorry, but if you say something I don't like, I should be able to hit you." Needless to say, we haven't seen her since. I don't know why she wanted me dead. Perhaps because she wanted to raise her grandkids like all her siblings are doing for their grandkids, because my cousins can't be parents. My grandmother defended my cousins and several other young women's R in court. I'm not related to her husband, much younger man that she remarried. When I was a teenager, I was very mentally unstable, and one day a nurse pulled my mother aside after my probably 10th mental institution stay and said I had signs of severe PTSD and trauma. I confessed what happened to me. I was in hospital care for about 6 months while reporting the case. My grandmother defended her husband instead of her grandchildren and the young women at their church. I'll probably never ever forgive her for that. My abuser eventually confessed guilty and was sentenced to up to 40 years in prison. The case was abhorrently disgusting, and despite finding tons of CP on his computer, my grandmother still stood by his side. I despise her, to say the least. I thought she'd have our backs. When my aunt and cousin from my mother's side tried to scam out our family home from my father on the day of my grandma's funeral, and on the same day, my cousin basically searched over grandma's bedroom in our house for any valuables or documents, both things just maybe an hour after the funeral. When they didn't show any interest in taking care of our grandmother, aunt's mother on her deathbed, and years before, while her health was getting worse and worse, but after the death showed up to blame everyone else on it. And on top of it, after running in a dead end and not getting anything from my grandma, because she already gave them a property years back, they started guilt-tripping us that morally they're entitled to at least a part of our house because our grandma lived there, and may have mentioned that she bought a part of it. Take in mind, this is my father's house, which he bought for his own money and took a mortgage on to pay for, and grandma never bought any part of it, but just moved in with us due to old age. I have cut contact with them since this happened. My uncle was dying, like days away. I was spending almost every waking moment with him. My cousin, the oldest of his 2 sons, come in and says, "Hey Dad, I was looking at the Best Buy credit card application, and it says that if the credit card holder dies with a balance, the issuer will forgive the loan. Can you sign this?" The look of disappointment in my uncle's face was heartbreaking. He said, "No one will profit from my death." It cemented my uncle as the best and my cousin as the worst. When they shit-talked my mom after she gave her mother's eulogy, they were very cruel about it and purposefully loudly talked about how the eulogy wasn't very good in my mom's hearing. It made me really angry. My mom is the sweetest person in the entire world and gave the most heartfelt eulogy that left a lot of the room in tears. My grandmother was a difficult woman, but my mom loved her with all her flaws and was probably the only one who was truly devastated at her death. My father's siblings unleashed tragic verbal assaults on me after his death. Literally was forced to plan an escape from a property she owned, which I was renting. I notified the police that there might be an incident. I had looked up to this person as a safe member of my family, totally lost all respect, and realized I was sheltered from my family's reality for my 40 years. This man was considered part of the family, but turns out he was the person who killed my infant niece. He confessed to my sister sometime after the funeral of my niece that he was the one who killed her. She was crying one night in her crib, and he went to care for her. The following morning, my sister goes into the room to find my niece blue in the face, laying in her crib not breathing. That man shook my infant niece almost to death, laid her back in her bed, knowingly almost dead. He went back to bed next to my sister and didn't say a single word to her, nor did he say anything the morning my sister found her daughter dead in her crib. By the way, all that effer got charged with was child neglect and was sentenced to probation. I suppose I should have always known, but my uncle was convicted of molesting his underage stepdaughter while she was asleep. Some of my family members defend the situation. Some claim he's better now. He only served 8 years in prison and is now free and living with the family. It's sickening, and I have cut everyone off from that family except my dad. I don't have the strength to cut him off yet. He makes my life much easier, so maybe I'm just being selfish.